So welcome back, everybody. This is Paul again. I'm going to talk some more about esoteric science and the essential aspect of an esoteric approach to science and knowledge and this whole life that we're living has to do with our own self-knowledge first, because if we understand who we are as existence, you strip away all the layers, and where does this consciousness come from, you see? And I've talked about that in a lot of videos and talk about perception. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how that applies in a really practical way, essentially in life and in civilization. And the point that many of the sages have made is something really, really simple. And that is, don't ever judge. We shouldn't judge anyone else. Any other being that we see, whether small, big, large, other human being. It goes along with the teaching from Patanjali of don't react to what you perceive. You see, because whoever we are, if we don't spend some time reflecting on our own being and our own perceptions and our own limits of perceptions, then no matter what we do, whether we're relationships or business or anything else in politics, if we don't understand, have some reference to what we are as a being, then we're never going to understand how other beings are, what their experience is. Now, I used to be a photographer, and I photographed a lot of people. And little kids, little babies and so on, they don't have a concept about themselves. Nobody has told them yet, maybe, oh, you're terrible, or they don't have all these opinions about your religion or anything like that. You're just a being, and who doesn't love a baby? Just, oh, they're so sweet. They have no concepts about anything. They're just so happy. That same being that we were when we were little is here with us now. And no matter how beautiful a person is, or handsome, or whatever, they can take a bad picture. You see, I used to do weddings. You take a lot of pictures, and you just catch people doing the weirdest things, and the way that their faces, the way their angle is, and so on. And you don't publish those pictures. You see, you don't print those pictures, because there is a reality of a person. For example, when we get photographed, we want them to look our best. You might say, how are we going to look our best? Now, we get trained in society to put on different makeups and different things and costumes and whatever. And in some cultures, they wear these beautiful outfits, and their mind is beautiful, whatever. And then in our mind, it's like, whoa, I don't know how they wear that stuff. You know, like black clothes or whatever, or earrings that stick out like this, or nose rings or whatever. I don't know how they do that stuff. But that particular aspect of our being has a very narrow. It's a really small being in a way. I mean, we have to admit ourselves. No matter if you have PhDs and you did this and that in all your lifetime, and on the grand scale of consciousness, and you compare yourself to Da Vinci or Michelangelo or Newton or some of those people. Like, well, my degrees are pretty good, but I don't really compare to some of those people, like Thoth or something. So the point I'm trying to make is, when we judge other people, we're really putting an overlay of our own limited perspective. Like, for example, you might meet somebody you have no idea, and based totally on a picture, just totally on your first impression, then you have all these concepts. This whole programming starts running in, like, well, whether shape or color or religion or all these other things, whether you like their hair or not, or whether it's the right color, or you don't like their eyes or their nose or something. All this like data runs in our subconscious mind, and it has no relation to what the person that you are really talking to. So when we project on other people what our own limits are, that's why you see the greatest sages, the greatest, most loving, most enlightened people. I've met some people, and they themselves, like, everywhere they go, in some senses, whether they physically do it or not, like the Dalai Lama, they may not physically always do this, but they're basically interior, their recognition that everywhere I look is magic. Every being is a goddess or God. Everywhere I look is wonderful. So there's a constant humility, a constant overwhelming joy of appreciation, you might say. And when we look at other people, we overlay our own concepts on them many times, and we don't understand how their own consciousness is experiencing their existence, you see. And therefore, in the political world and the religious world and any other, even in business world, there's a whole lot of definitions and pigeonholing that goes on, and concepts and overlays and so on, and it constantly happens, and it just creates endless division. And there's really no end to that controversy, because if we live our lives in such a way that we do all that, it's kind of like everywhere we go, we're just laying over some idea on everything else and everyone else. And this, when millions of people do that, they're just walking around. It's like everybody's in a fog, and they have totally different weird concepts about everyone else, and they don't even understand their own existence or even their own being. Many great teachers have come on this earth, and people are religious. I grew up in a Christian home, okay, and Buddha, and people who grew up with Buddha and Krishna. What do they all have in common? The compassion. The compassion of the unity awareness, that you look at another being and you go, well, I didn't create that being. What I'm looking at something that was a magical creation out of this whole thing, and I got one of those bodies too, and like we should be just like having some joyous conversation. Hey, isn't this great to be alive here? Isn't it wonderful? What did you learn when you're in your life? So I talk about this a lot. I talk about preconceptions in the way we view and observe our existence, and it applies in this case. We're talking about relationships and human interaction and societies. Okay. I grew up in a foreign country where I had to interact with people that were very different from my own parents and so on. I was in India, and everywhere I looked, everyone was brown, and they had a religion that was totally different than my parents' religion, and they didn't celebrate Christmas, and they had fireworks when we didn't many times a year, and we only had them once. And so there was a whole different concept. But then you relate to people from another culture, you realize, well, they all just like good food, they have warmth, they like happiness, they like love and affection, they like their dogs just like we do, and they like their pets, and they like their family, and they like their children, and they want to eat good food and have a happy life. There's no difference. The outside is different, and yet we look at another color or another culture that we don't like the way they live, the food they eat, or the houses that they live in, the clothes they wear. It's all superficial. And there's an old teaching from one of the sages that say, well, look, but if you know something is gold, everything is gold. That you know everything is gold. The shape of the gold doesn't matter, whether it's a ring or a decoration or on a temple or whatever is used electronically. Gold is gold. People appreciate gold wherever it is. Even if people now they even harvest the old electronics, gold is gold. It may be in a little old computer from the 80s or something, but let's chop it up and harvest that gold because it's imperishable. Our own nature is like that gold, and it's symbolized in esoteric philosophy, the symbol of the sun with the dot in the middle, the hydrogen atom, the central sun. The gold is a very unique substance, as we all know. So when we judge other people, whether it's we're limiting ourselves. You see, as there's a saying, as you judge others, so shall you judge. Well, it's sort of like, okay, well, if you put this box around someone else, it means you're just looking through that little tube or that little frame, and that's how you see somebody. But that shows that you don't have an understanding of your own imperishable, immortal, eternal, non-local, non-divisible existence that has, as I say in other videos, the root of our own awareness of all beings comes from one place. All the atoms come from one place. If atoms make up our body and our nerves, well, I guess where they all come from and where those elements come from, they all come from one dimensional source, and they all go back to that source. So whoever we are on this planet, And you look at another person and stop judging them because you didn't create them. Something happened. They're being sustained. I mean, there's an old saying like the rain falls on the wicked and the just, because we're all here. If we're having a life and our breathing is going on, then something in the cosmic creation is keeping us going. They may not judge us the same way, you know. In the timeless zone of our deeper awareness, the personal behavior of people on an individual level, like we know that, for example, maybe sometimes we even ourselves, we have outbursts, or we have do stupid things in our life, and it happens to all of us. But that doesn't define entirely who we are as a person, you see, because we keep growing just like a flower. It's getting bigger and bigger. If you look at certain flowers, like even a rose, like if you just dig it down into some like petals or something, it won't be as pretty, but it's the composition of it. It's the unfolding of it. And when we look at another human being, people talk about the chakras or the inner centers, but we have a system of energy in our being that sustains and allows us to have a body, and inhabiting that body is at the essential level, all the way down to the atoms and the subatomic particles, is a sense of existence that is inherent in the cosmos, so that if we look at other beings, we should not have a judgment, because they might not like us either. See, you know, we may be judging someone else, and then in return, you don't know, but they're probably thinking that, you know, you're awfully strange. So one time I was at a zoo, and I was looking at, there was a whole bunch of people looking at this big, huge glass, and then behind there was a couple of monkeys, some big apes or something. They're sitting there, and one of them was sitting right up next to the glass, and he was looking out at us just like the way we were looking at him. And the people turned around, they turn around their friends, say, "Hey, do you see that monkey over there? What it did?" And then the monkey turned around to another monkey and like, "Hey, get a load of these humans, you know, get a load of these people. Look what they're doing over there." Isn't that one funny? So consciousness is one. So every human being, you look at other beings, you know, people love their dogs. Sometimes people just really adore their dogs, because the dog, like, okay, they're in heaven. We project all kinds of stuff on our dogs. Our dog is a saint dog, and we love that dog. And the dog is like, has its own little world here, and it loves you too, but sure, give me that biscuit, okay, because that's why I love you. But consciousness, when you look at another eye. Sometimes you just look at another person's eyes or animal's eyes, and if you just look and let go of yourself for a while, let go of your concept of your own being for a while, and you look at their eyes, and you notice how the eye is shaped, and it's like a circle, okay, and then it has that dot in the middle. There's something cosmic peering out from those other eyes that is exactly the same as the consciousness that's staring out of your eyes. So that's why all the great sages say, "Do unto others," because you really, if you harm others, you really just making an obstacle for your own existence. It's a really practical thing, actually. But maybe that's enough about that subject here, because, you know, we don't want to judge others. Now, the other side of the coin is reflecting on who we are as beings, because meditation, a lot of people just have these concepts about it, because we have this floating consciousness, you might say, that's non-divisible, and it doesn't have necessarily an identity. Okay, the great sages, they talk about this like, it is everything, so what does it need to identify with? It is the existence itself, so it doesn't need to have, like, well, you know, a sense of like, I'm really somebody. It's just, it is what it is. It is the existence. So that same spark frequency is found in our bodies, in the chemicals in our body, in the elements of our body. So in our subtle consciousness, just like when we close our eyes, we close our senses, there is a remaining observational consciousness that is just simply, it's extremely simple. It's just steadiness. So, just like a hurricane has in the center, like a a spin, in the center of that spin, there's an absolute silence, you might say. There's such an intensity, and that intensity really is in our own being, and we can go into a subtle place through closing off our external senses and allowing ourselves to perceive, just be conscious in a non-sense dependent way. You see, when we are not using our external senses temporarily, and they're subtle or they're subdued to some degree, then what awakens is that other consciousness that inhabits us, that is vast, that is always perceiving on some deep level, including within our own body. It's like all subconsciously coordinating all of the energy movements in our life. So a lot of meditation techniques talk about getting away from the senses, you might say. Now, on some really crude level, you might say, well, don't even eat anything, or don't have sex, or don't hug anybody, or don't touch anything, or whatever. That's a really crude physical level of it. But essentially, there's a part in our own being that when we let go for a while of all those kinds of activities of touch and sense and even mental activity, there's a stillness and a silence there, which is absolutely wonderful to experience, because there's a place of rest in our own being that all these senses disturb us. If you take a drug or whatever, if you're tired or you don't have any sleep for a while, and all your senses are just like going crazy and you're just overstimulated, whatever. And then we say, I gotta go rest, I gotta go hide somewhere and be away from everything. Well, essentially, on a deeper level, we need to go hide in that chamber of the quiet, deep, profound silence of our own existence, where there's no judgment, no duality, no controversy, no competition. It's a place where we belong, where we come from. I mean, when we started in this, at some point in the womb, somewhere along the line, it's hard to determine, but there's a conscious link that the fetus sort of wakes up or something, okay? And maybe it starts to experience the physical senses. And they said that the ear is the first sense that comes along. It's like the inner ear, and water-based and so on. So, but that proves that on a very fundamental, this consciousness is unfolding in the womb, and it's slowly starting to come into manifestation, these really fine tissues and elements and various molecules that are participating in the creation of this body. But there's a link, there's a thread, and there's a saying where at a certain point in time, the consciousness there's unconscious at some point, and then it becomes conscious in the womb, and the baby starts to get a lot more conscious. Now, the womb is a symbol of what our own existence is, because just because we come out of the physical womb, we're still, in some degree, needing to reconnect with that immortal part of us that, on a cellular, molecular level, the consciousness that is growing into us, just like the water in a tree and all the elements in a tree. It just seeps out all these elements and the water, and it just slowly grows into this huge thing. And essentially, that's a part of nature. Our being is slowly exuding out, and we keep growing bigger and bigger, and then we morph in different physical shapes, and our hair changes and everything. All of that power and energy is just phenomenal and incredible, and it is part of our real existence. So if we identify only with if we look our shape in the mirror, and one day we look at ourselves, well, I can't look at that, but don't worry about it. the physical body you can dress it up or whatever, but the real you is always beautiful because it's creating those cells, it's creating those chemistry in your body and all. Now, esoteric science, if you want to get really into that, and I'm not an expert, but you go into Ayurveda and the way that the yoga system translates into health situations and health, so on. So I see I'm running about 20 minutes here, and I'm going to give a few more minutes here, but I want to read a little bit about one of the most favorite books that I have called The Light of the Soul, or really it's a commentary on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and I've reviewed this book in other videos, but also it's been commented on by many, including Vivekananda and Yogananda and many others over the centuries. At least 5,000 years old, and there's basically 108 aphorisms or sutras that help us understand how that science of integrating our own existence and connecting that thread, how we integrate it in a practical experience so that our consciousness really does grow, so that our physical brain and all the mechanisms in our bodies, not just the brain, but the intelligence of the coordinated, complete intelligence of this entire system that we're living in, when aligned properly, all these beautiful things can unfold, and we have a higher perception of our existence. So I'll just read you the first few sutras here. There's 4 of them. Om, the following instruction concerns the science of union. The science of union, the science of making that thread, that connection of reuniting, of re-recognizing our own true nature. And I use the sound Om. I've talked about that in others. There's many talks about that. Om, a simple, beautiful sound that can resonate in our being, that is a symbolic sound representation of the cosmic sound that is the universe is basically run on, basically the current, you might say. Then the second one is the union. This union or yoga is achieved through the subjugation of the psychic nature and the restraint of the mind. Okay, so there we go. That's a big statement, because basically by subduing our external senses, by lessening their impact on us, including our memory and our thinking process, by subduing that for a while, you can enter in the state of union, where then all of that becomes an observation, because just like the mind, instead of identifying with the mind becomes a tool. I can pick the tool up, I can use it, I can put it down. All the faculties of our existence, our body, we can say, I'm going to move my hand or not move my hand. I can think or not think. You see, we can use our intelligence in our thinking process. If we coordinate all our random thoughts into a steady perception, then that steady perception can be used like a flashlight, like a laser, to shine and direct and guide us. The third statement is, when this has been accomplished, the yogi knows himself as he truly is. In other words, when we know who we are on a fundamental level through a practical experience and unite with that, just reunite our awareness with what we already are, then all the duality just ceases and we start perceiving in the way that we're intended to perceive. And then the final one of this 4 here is, up until now, the human being has identified himself with his forms and with their active modifications. The identification that we have, if we let go of the identification with the forms, we can use the forms, no problem. We don't have to go out and do weird things to your body or whatever. Have the form, enjoy the form. Don't necessarily identify with it completely, because these forms can change. Our eyes change, hands change. People have lost arms and legs and so on, and they still have an identity. Their identity is one. There's not a split in there. There's not like a higher thing. I mean, there's one being here, and depend on how conscious it is. And for example, you have a car, and some cars like a Model T, you can get somewhere, but it's kind of rustic. A lot of people use their bodies that way. They don't know that, hey, your car really is just a Ferrari. Actually, it's more like a UFO. Okay, so you got all kinds of buttons here you don't know about in this vehicle that we have. So just recognizing that there's more potential. So getting back to the theme of not judging others, as you judge others, so are you. If we have a deep understanding and openness about our own being on some really deep level, we're naturally not going to judge others, because the perception is different. The perception is that you're seeing basically an extension of one beingness, and you're a part of that, and so judging is just really not appropriate. So thanks again for watching. I try to make these videos reasonably short, so I appreciate the feedback, and if there's anything helpful I've said, I appreciate some feedback, and like and share. So thanks again.